Hello dear students, welcome to this class on the poem The Gift Outright by Robert Frost. I hope you have learned a few poems by this poet Robert Frost in your school days, like Stopping by the Woods in a Snowy Evening, Mending Wall, Road Not Taken. So you are familiar with the poems by this poet Robert Frost, especially this famous poem Stopping by the Woods in a Snowy Evening, where we find excellent conclusion, the 4 lines which are repeated very often by all of us. And coming to this poet, he won a Pulitzer Prize 4 times, and he's a very famous poet who achieved fame during his lifetime. And he published many poems, and he calls himself a farmer poet. Though he belongs to the modern era, he calls himself a farmer poet and writes romantic poetry. And he doesn't follow the modernist poets or symbolist poets like Ezra Pound or T.S. Eliot of his time. But he chose to write romantic poems, and that made him famous. And as the poem goes, in Road Not Taken, and that has made all the difference in his literary career. And another feature that we find in his poem is that it begins in delight and ends in wisdom. The poems are very simple, vivid, but there is a piece of wisdom which is which we find in the concluding lines of the poems. In most of the poems, we find such a moral lesson towards the end of the poem. In Mending Walls, we find such a lesson where the speaker says, good fences make good neighbors. In Road Not Taken, it's about the choices that we make in life. And in this poem that we are going to learn, it's a bit different from such poems like Apple Picking, Birches, Stopping by the Woods in a Snowy Evening. Actually, we need to look into the context of this poem. When John F. Kennedy assumed his chair at the White House, Robert Frost was invited to recite a poem, and he came with the poem Dedication. But the sun's glare, while he was on the podium, he couldn't read that poem. And then he immediately recited a poem that he wrote long back in the 1940s, almost around 1942, which was published in A Witness Tree, the collection A Witness Tree, the poem The Gift Outright. It's a patriotic poem, and he recited that poem, and the poem was a success. This is a patriotic lyric poem. He himself says that it is about the history of United States in 16 lines. And it's in blank verse. We can say rather, he says it is history of United States in blank verse, but we don't find a rhythmic pattern here. We can say that it's actually, this poem is written in free verse. There is no rhyme scheme or rhythmical pattern, regularly repeating pattern that we find in this poem. But nevertheless, it's a patriotic poem. It's a history of the United States in those few lines. And we'll see what happens in this poem. He talks about how the Pilgrim Fathers, how the the people of England came to settle in America and later became the citizens of America. He talks about the Pilgrim Fathers. Earlier, a group of people from England came to, there was persecution there in England. The Catholics persecuted the Protestants or the Puritans, and a group of Puritans, that is in England. Just understand the context a bit. So these Puritans, this group of Puritans, they escaped. In order to escape persecution, the king and even those who were in power at that point of time started killing and persecuting these group of people, and they escaped from England and came to America, to this place, this new place, America, which was not acquired by any of other colonial powers. And they come to America, and they start settling there. But these people, they are called Pilgrim Fathers, these people, and then later on they have descendants, and even the descendants, they thought that their motherland is England and not America. They thought that America is just a colony for them, and they are the colonial powers possessing this land, America. They don't have this affection of a homeland or affection of a motherland towards this country. They don't think that they belong to this country. They think that the country belonged to them as a colony. Did you understand the difference? That is what we find in this poem. The land didn't possess them, but they possessed the land. You know, like a colony, they possess this land, but they don't have that feeling of belongingness to the country. And that is explained in the poem, The Gift Outright. And finally, these people, they started having this affection and sense of belongingness towards this country, and they started moving westward, you know, expanding their territories. They started exploring this virgin land, and they started to feel this a sense of motherhood or sense of belongingness towards this country, America. And that has made all the difference to this Americans. And that is what we find in this poem. So shall we read the poem? Could you please turn to the poem, The Gift Outright by Robert Frost. The gift outright. The land was ours before we were the lands. She was our land more than 100 years before we were her people. She was ours in Massachusetts, in Virginia, but we were England's, still colonials, possessing what we still were unpossessed by what we are now no more possessed. Something we were withholding made us weak until we found out that it was ourselves. We were withholding from our land of living, and forthwith found salvation in surrender. Such as we were, we gave ourselves outright. The deed of gift was many deeds of war. To the land, vaguely realizing westward, but still unstoried, artless, unenhanced, such as she was, such as she would become. So this is a beautiful poem, a patriotic poem. So Robert Frost says, the land was ours before we were the lands. We owned the land. The land was ours, but we are not owned by the land, or we were not the lands. We are not the sons of this land. That is the meaning. You know, we are not of this land. We are not the sons of this land, but we possess this land. She was our land more than 100 years. For more than 100 years, this land belonged to us. She was our land. Before we were her people, you know, we were not her people. We just possessed that land. We never felt that we are the people of this land. She was ours. We possessed these colonies in Virginia, in Massachusetts, but we were England's. But we thought that we belonged to England. Our connection or belongingness was towards the country England, which we never possessed. We are in America, but we thought that we belong to England, and only the land America belonged to us. We are not sons of this country, but we were England's, still colonials. We thought that we are colonial powers. We are English colonial powers colonizing this American cities like Massachusetts, Virginia, and other states, possessing what we still were unpossessed by. But on the other hand, we were unpossessed by England. We don't actually belong to England, but we thought that we are her children, children of England, possessed by what we now no more possessed. And we thought we are possessed by the country, or we think that, you know, we are the children of England, the country which we no longer possess. They actually escaped from this country because of persecution and are settled in another country. But still, even 100 years later, they thought that they belong to this country which they no longer possess, that is England. But they possessed this country, America, but they don't actually feel that belongingness of motherland towards America. Did you get the idea how there are two states, and from one state a group of settlers came to another state, but they thought that the new country is not their homeland, but the homeland was the place where they came from. And after 100 years, this is what happened. Something we were withholding made us weak, but we are not welcome in America. We are not going there. And something made us weak, and they couldn't find out what it was. And finally, they found out that it was they were withholding themselves from the land. You know, they were not considering their land of living as their motherland, their native land. And that has made them weak. Until we found out that it was ourselves we were withholding from our land of living. So which is the land of living? This America. They are living in this land, and they are withholding themselves from this land of their living. And forthwith found salvation in surrender. And they found salvation by surrendering themselves to the land. You know, they started accepting this new land as their motherland. And they found salvation. Such as we were, we gave ourselves outright to this country. The deed of gift was many deeds of war. And as we thought, or as we started considering this land as their motherland, they started fighting or waging wars of independence against or to protect their motherland, to expand the territories, to move westwards. They started fighting with other tribal people who were settled there. So when they started to feel this belonging towards this motherland, you know, they were ready to give lives to the motherland, ready to give lives to their state, to the land, vaguely realizing westward, and they started moving westward, expanding their territories, but still unstoried, artless, unenhanced. But still, you know, it is not recorded. The stories of this new land is not recorded. It is artless. You know, there isn't much that we find about this new country at that point of time in the history. And such as she was a virgin land, and such as she would become, even though we belong to them. You know, even after accepting this motherland, this country as their motherland, you know, the land is not going to change. It is wonderful with all its virgin resources. So this is how we find this poem, the development of the thought in the poem The Gift Outright by Robert Frost. I hope it is clear to you how this love for the country, or how patriotism is described by Frost in this poem, Gift Outright. I want all of you to read through this poem once or twice. And if you find any difficulty, please let me know. Shall we read once again? The land was ours before we were the lands. She was our land more than 100 years before we were her people. She was ours in Massachusetts, in Virginia, but we were England's, still colonials, possessing what we still were unpossessed by, possessed by what we now no more possessed. Something we were withholding made us weak until we found out that it was ourselves. We were withholding from our land of living, and forthwith found salvation in surrender. Such as we were, we gave ourselves outright. The deed of gift was many deeds of war, to the land vaguely realizing westward, but still unstoried, artless, unenhanced. Such as she was, such as she would become. Thank you.